Hi, grade nines. So today we're going to start our new unit, which is the reproductive system. So this unit would fall under the study of biology. So we've got sort of our three main schools of science. We've got our chemistry, biology, and our physics. So we've done our chemistry, and then astronomy actually falls under physics. And now we're going to take a look at some biology stuff. Now, before we start the lesson, for you to follow along in the notes there, we're going to watch a little video on the wacky history of cell theory. So let's watch this first.
One of the great things about science is that when scientists make a discovery, it's not always in a prescribed manner, as in only in a laboratory under strict settings with white lab coats and all sorts of neat science gizmos that go beep. In reality, the events and people involved in some of the major scientific discoveries are as weird and varied as they get. My case in point, the weird history of the cell theory. There are three parts to the cell theory. 1. All organisms are composed of one or more cells. 2. The cell is the basic unit of structure and organization in organisms. And 3. All cells come from pre-existing cells. To be honest, this all sounds incredibly boring until you dig a little deeper into how the world of microscopic organisms and this theory came to be. It all started in the early 1600s in the Netherlands, where a spectacle maker named Zacharias Janssen is said to have come up with the first compound microscope, along with the first telescope. Both claims are often disputed, as apparently he wasn't the only bored guy with a ton of glass lenses to play with at the time. Despite this, the microscope soon became a hot item that every naturalist or scientist at the time wanted to play with, making it much like the iPad of its day. One such person was a fellow Dutchman by the name of Anton van Leeuwenhoek, who heard about these microscope doohickeys, and instead of going out and buying one, he decided to make his own. And it was a strange little contraption indeed, as it looked more like a tiny paddle the size of a sunglass lens. If he had stuck two together, it probably would have made a wicked set of sunglasses that you couldn't see much out of. Anywho, once Leeuwenhoek had his microscope ready, he went to town looking at anything and everything he could with them, including the gunk on his teeth. Yes, you heard right. He actually discovered bacteria by looking at dental scrapings, which, when you keep in mind that people didn't brush their teeth much, if at all, back then, he must have had a lovely bunch of bacteria to look at. When he wrote about his discovery, he didn't call them bacteria as we know them today, but he called them animalcules, because they looked like little animals to him. While Leeuwenhoek was staring at his teeth gunk, he was also sending letters to a scientific colleague in England by the name of Robert Hooke. Hooke was a guy who really loved all aspects of science, so he dabbled in a little bit of everything, including physics, chemistry, and biology. Thus it is Hooke who we can thank for the term the cell, as he was looking at a piece of cork under his microscope, and the little chambers he saw reminded him of cells, or the rooms monks slept in their monasteries. Think college dorm rooms, but without the TVs, computers, and really annoying roommates. Hooke was something of an underappreciated scientist of his day, something he brought upon himself as he made the mistake of locking horns with one of the most famous scientists ever, Sir Isaac Newton. Remember when I said Hooke dabbled in many different fields? Well, after Newton published a groundbreaking book on how planets move due to gravity, Hooke made the claim that Newton had been inspired by Hooke's work in physics. Newton, to say the least, did not like that, which sparked a tense relationship between the two that lasted even after Hooke died, as quite a bit of Hooke's research, as well as his only portrait, was misplaced due to Newton. Much of it was rediscovered, thankfully, after Newton's time, but not his portrait, as sadly no one knows what Robert Hooke looked like. Fast forward to the 1800s, where two German scientists discovered something that today we might find rather obvious, but helped tie together what we now know as the cell theory. The first scientist was Matthias Schleiden, a botanist who liked to study plants under a microscope. From his years of studying different plant species, it finally dawned on him that every single plant he had looked at were all made of cells. At the same time, on the other end of Germany was Theodor Schwann, a scientist who not only studied slides of animal cells under the microscope and got a special type of nerve cell named after him, but also invented rebreathers for firefighters and had a kickin' pair of sideburns. After studying animal cells for a while, he too came to the conclusion that all animals were made of cells. Immediately, he reached out via snail mail, as Twitter had yet to be invented, to other scientists working in the same field, and it was Schleiden who got back to him, and the two started working on the beginnings of the cell theory. A bone of contention arose between them, as for the last part of the cell theory, that cells come from pre-existing cells, Schleiden didn't exactly subscribe to that thought, as he swore cells came from free cell formation, where they just kind of spontaneously crystallized into existence. That's when another scientist, named Rudolf Virchow, stepped in with research showing that cells did come from other cells. Research that was actually, how to put it, borrowed without permission from a Jewish scientist by the name of Robert Remak, which led to two more feuding scientists. Thus, from teeth gunk to torquing off Newton, crystallization to Schwann cells, the cell theory came to be an important part of biology today. Some things we know about science today may seem boring, but how we came to know them is incredibly fascinating. So if something bores you, dig deeper. It's probably got a really weird story behind it somewhere.
Okay, so I like that video. I like that video a lot. Just it acknowledges sort of how important history is important, and how it's important for us as learners to place a scientific discovery in a certain time in history. So, for example, why were things being studied at a certain time? In chemistry, I was just talking the other day about the gas laws, and for example, hot air balloons. You guys know hot air balloons, right? There's a little basket there. Anyways, people who want to travel by hot air. In France, this was happening in the 1700s, and so because people wanted to travel by hot air balloon, a lot of the science revolved around gases and studying how they worked. And so, we wouldn't necessarily have all that information if we didn't understand the historical context. Anyways, okay, so this is lesson 3.1. So you've got your notes in front of you there. So we're just going to go through it. You're going to write down your notes there, and then we'll have an assignment for you here. Okay, so the cell is the basic unit of life. We know this because all life functions can be completed by each individual cell. So as always, things in red are what you need to copy down on your page there. So basically, every single cell can accomplish all of the different life functions. So they can use energy, eliminate get rid of wastes, respond to changes in the environment, build body parts, store genetic code that's in our DNA. They can reproduce. All of these functions can be carried out by one cell. Now, hold on. Actually, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So we've got approximately 100 trillion cells in our body, so we have a whole lot there. And cell theory is what we use to explain all of the observations of living things today. So cell theory is what we're going to go through here. So there's three parts of cell theory here. So number one, all living organisms are composed of one or more cells. You can write that in your notes there. All living organisms are composed of one or more cells. Now this is actually a little bit controversial because non-cellular life, such as viruses, are disputed as a life form. So we have some controversy there. So some scientists would say that viruses do count as being alive, others not so much. Of course, that's a very timely example in the time of our COVID-19, right? So is COVID-19 alive? I guess it depends on who you ask. Okay, now number two, second part of cell theory. The cell is the basic unit of structure and organization in organisms. So organisms means, again, all living things. So the cell is the basic unit and structure for all living things. Number three, cells arise from pre-existing cells. So if you look at this diagram here, we've got our first cell, and then we have, this is the process of mitosis here, which we'll learn more about in the next few days. Some of you guys will definitely recognize that word mitosis, and maybe your grade 7 or 8 teachers touched on that. We've got prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Anyways, we see what's happening in our picture here. So we've got the cell by itself here, and then in this one, the nucleus in the cell there is duplicating or replicating itself. And then in the third one here, it's starting to split apart, and then finally we end up with 2 unique cells here. So this would be watching the cells arise from pre-existing cells, which of course leads to the question, well, where did the first cell come from? And that's probably a bit of a philosophical question that you can answer. Okay, now for the next part here. These are, it's covering it here. This is organelles here. So organelles we can define as specialized structures inside of a cell. Each has its own job in the cell. So if you took a microscope, and we will actually, we're going to be using the microscopes. We'll do a lab on mitosis in the next week or so. If you take a microscope and you look at a cell, if you get high enough power, you can see the different structures in there, and those are called organelles. Each one of them is going to have its own job. Now, each cell organelle is surrounded by a membrane, which is important because they allow several different processes to happen at the same time. Now, some of you will have in your middle years courses, some of you will definitely have seen diagrams like this before, right? So probably most of you have, really. For whatever reason, the middle years teachers really seem to love going through the cell, which is great. I mean, it's part of the curriculum, which is good. So some of you will be able to name some of these. So if you're watching this video, I would ask you to pause the video right now, and you can fill in that big box on your sheet there. I want you to talk to each other and see how many you can remember. You don't need to have them numbered, but just remember how many different organelles can you remember from your grade 7 and 8 classes. Probably quite a few. Okay, so if you're back with me now, and I'm gonna, we'll just talk about a few of them. Hopefully you came up with some. You've got things like a nucleus, nucleolus, riboplasmic reticulum, we've got vacuoles, we've got the Golgi apparatus, what's the one that everyone always remembers? Yeah, the mitochondria, right? So mitochondria, and I bet you all can define it too. The powerhouse of the cell. There's something about that just sticks in people's minds, and it's always been like that. But then I was actually asking my son, and he was like, "Well, Mom, it's a meme. How can you not know this?" So here we go. You've probably seen this. So school system. Don't want to hear about it. Don't want to hear about all these things, right? But what do we teach you? The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. I like that meme. Anyways, yeah, I'm a science teacher, so clearly in my mind, this is important. So, whatever, Drake, you don't know what you're talking about. It's important. Hopefully, obviously, the school system addresses this kind of stuff too. But yeah, I still want you to know the organelles, right? So anyways, you're going to go through the different organelles. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because, quite frankly, most of you will have seen this before. This is a small part of the grade 9 curriculum. We're going to introduce you to all kinds of new interesting stuff. So the organelles should be reviewed. So if you flip your notes over there, the next page there is called cell organelles, and that's the worksheet that I'd like you to work on. So you can define the different functions of the different organelles that are listed there, and then there's 3 questions for you to answer there, and you might have to Google those. Your textbook will also have answers for you, so you can either Google answers or use your textbook, whatever you would prefer. Okay, thanks everyone.